Waikiki no hona boha kulo KAPAEMAHU e na umua e. Mai tahiti ki ia heaven na iwa iwa. Ui e halo no na bono e. Mai ai Waikiki no hona boha kulo KAPAEMAHU e na umua e. Mai tahiti ki ia heaven na iwa iwa. Ui e halo no na bono e. Luhi loa ke kanaka i kai muhi e lua hele i hora i ulo ko ue. Kuka haloa ka puni me kinohi na me hola ka hola na ki e ki e. Luhi loa ke kanaka i kai muhi e lua hele i hora i ka puni me kinohi na me hola ka hola na ki e ki e. Uana i amagi me ka haahe o KAPAEMAHU e na umua e. Na mahu e kapu kapu i ola no amaloa e. Yola.
Yola. Yola no na mahu hie kapu kapu.
Aloha. Welcome to the 40th Annual Hawaii International Film Festival presented by Halekulani. My name is Leanne Ferrer, and I'm the Executive Director of Pacific Islanders and Communications, which is a proud sponsor of this program and of the Pacific Showcase. For updates on the HIFF program and how to vote for audience awards, please see the information on the screen. Today, we'll be discussing the animated short KAPAEMAHU and getting a special sneak preview of the documentary in progress about this fascinating aspect of Hawaiian history and culture. I'd like to introduce the directors and producers of KAPAEMAHU, a team of three: Hinale Moana Wong Kalu, Dean Hamer, and Joe Wilson. So we'll go to the first question, and whoever wants to jump in first, but what inspired this film?
Mahalo, Leanne. And before I answer that, I'd like to extend a very special mahalo to Kumu Patrick Makuakane and his halau in Oakland. Na leihulu I kawekiu mahalo nui alako no kalako ho okupu aloha I keia ki ionioni o KAPAEMAHU and their contribution of their offering or their gift is so much appreciated. But this film is inspired by our very own history, as well as the thought of being able to retell this history in today's time.
I think Joe and I first learned about the stones when we were filming Hina, who was the subject of our first documentary in the Pacific called Kumu Hina. And it's all about her life and her very important work as a cultural practitioner and a teacher. And we were filming down in Waikiki, and she pointed out some stones and actually began to chant to the stones. And then she asked us, do you know why these stones are a sacred site? And of course, we had no idea whatsoever. But that led us on to almost 10 years of research. And the more we learned about the story, the more we thought that it would really make a fantastic film. I think during that period also, our relationship with Hina evolved because originally it was like, she's the subject and we are the directors and we're making a film about her. But it became evident pretty early on that Hina is also a great storyteller. And even as we were filming her, she was setting up situations so that the story could be told in an optimal way. So we were really happy when we started thinking about making a film about the Stones, about asking Hina if she would be involved and come over to our side of the lens. And she not only came over, she also took over the project and really became the lead director. So it was an exciting way to collaborate, I think.
So this seems to be the very first film in Olelo Ni'ihau. Why did you choose that form of Hawaiian?
Yes, I chose to be able to express my thoughts and be able to share this story through Olelo Ni'ihau because it is the form of Hawaiian that is most comfortable for me. My thoughts flow with it, and it's due to my language rearing and upbringing within the Ohana Ni'ihau community, primarily the ones that live on Kauai. And I would say that without my Ni'ihau family, and of course, kupuna on both sides, and just a circle that has empowered me to be able to speak in our language. I certainly did have my share of time spent in academic Hawaiian settings, from high school to the university. But my most formidable learning and my most significant amount of time spent in our Hawaiian language is in the Ni'ihau community. And that's the way that I am able to communicate best.
I'd just add to that that it was always our idea to bring the story back to life in the way that it might have been heard hundreds of years ago when it was being passed down through the generations orally. And when foreigners arrived in Hawaii, they prevented the Hawaiian language from being spoken and from being learned. So it was broken, except on the island of Ni'ihau, where it has been continuously spoken throughout the ages. So when Hina said she wanted to voice the animation in the Ni'ihau language, it just made sense to us because that's the way it probably was heard back hundreds of years ago.
Amazing. And then why did you decide to tell it through animation? And the second part of that question is, what guided the story or the style of the animation?
We had a lot of discussion about the best way to tell this story. At one point, we thought about a children's book. We even considered a live action film. But ultimately, we just decided that animation would be the most artful way to do it because it allowed us to show the main characters, who are sort of bigger than life characters, in a way that we hoped and believe will be respectful and dignified. It also let us show some of the more abstract aspects of the story. For example, when the mana of the healers is transferred into the stones. So in developing all this, we were incredibly fortunate to collaborate with Daniel Sousa. He's Oscar nominated, he is an islander himself, and he really gravitated towards tapa and used that to develop the whole palette for the film, which we think is very fitting. The music designer was Dan Golden. He did a great job of incorporating flutes and drums and other Polynesian instruments, and also in bringing in one of the greatest assets for the film, and that is a special chant that was composed for KAPAEMAHU by the amazing Kamaka'iwa Kanakaole. And we think that that chant really plays an important part in telling the story.
You as a team have done mostly documentaries. So how would you describe this film?
This film is a story that recounts a mo'olelo. And in Hawaiian culture, the word mo'olelo stands for story, but it also stands for history. So this is more than just a story. It's not a fairy tale, it's not a myth, but it's our history.
Mahalo for explaining mo'olelo, because the film has like two sections. First, telling of the full mo'olelo, and then toward the end, it moves quickly like through the 20th century Hawaii. So why did you make that choice in storytelling?
I think as we were researching the story, we gradually realized that while the original mo'olelo is fascinating, almost equally important is what happened to the mo'olelo in modern times. Because these stories aren't static, they're changing constantly. And the changes that were imposed on KAPAEMAHU were mostly to sort of suppress and censor the original story. So we found out that after the stones got buried under a bowling alley for 30 years and they got dug up, the stones were put in a respected space, but suddenly the story was censored and it wasn't about Mahu at all anymore. And in that exact same time, within a few weeks actually, there was a mainland news reporter that came to Hawaii, and he was really upset by all these Mahu going around, and he thought that was terrible and wrote a couple of really devastating newspaper articles saying, there are these deviates who are stalking our streets and trying to trick servicemen. And that really had a devastating effect. It ended up in a law that forced Mahu to wear a little button, a physical button that said, I am a boy.
And what effect do you hope this film and the other projects that you're doing around it will have on the stones in Waikiki?
Everything that we engage in, all of the stories, the history that we're able to bring to our people, for me, it must absolutely have to have value from being grounded here in Hawaii as the mainland, as the homeland of Kanaka. And it must reflect that Hawaii is our piko. It is our umbilical cord. It is the connection to our foremothers and forefathers and those who came before them. Our storytelling must uplift the dignity and honor of Kanaka. It must empower our people to tell more stories. It must bring our language to the forefront. It must honor our next generations by being able to provide at least some semblance of effort that we did our best to tell stories before no one is able to tell them. And I would also like to speak specifically to KAPAEMAHU. The stones have a wonderful and very precious story to tell. These stones are cared for by other Kanaka in our community, and we truly appreciate and we respect the time that they give. Many other people have not respected the stones, and they've left all kinds of physical things there. There's been damage done to the stones in the area, and so our film project absolutely stands behind all of the efforts that simply honor the story, honor the history, but also honor the people who care for them.
Excellent. And what are the future plans for the film?
Well, like all the work we do, our hope is that this film will open up new conversations and new understandings about a lot of the important themes that the story represents. And that relates to not just gender and gender diversity, but also to healing. And this is a monument that is still on Waikiki Beach today that celebrates these great figures in Hawaiian history who happen to be Mahu, but also brought the healing arts to Hawaii. And we're living now in a time when more holistic approaches to healing are really deeply needed. And that leads really to another exciting element of this project, which is that the Bishop Museum here in Honolulu is designing and curating an exhibition that will launch in the spring of 2022 with the film as its basis to explore all these themes. And we think this will not have an impact just on visitors to the museum here in Hawaii, but because it will live online in digital form and be shared across the US, around the world, and particularly here in the Pacific, it's really going to bring new ways of understanding all of these issues to generations to come.
What was the most exciting moment within this project? What was the most exciting moment in making this film?
Well, for me, it was actually during the research phase, because we knew that we wanted to tell the story in the most original form possible, but there had been so much suppression and censorship, we weren't sure what that was. And so it was when we were in the archives at the Pacific Room at the library at UH Manoa. And we came upon a box back in the back, and it contained the original handwritten manuscript of the Mo'olelo, as it was first conveyed by Harbaughto Boyd, who was a high-placed Hawaiian, very close to the Queen. And it was really exciting to see it written down by hand. And that actually became the basis for the script. And we ended up sticking to it as much as possible because we figured it was as close as Hawaiians were able to write it down at that time. So I know it's kind of nerdy, but that was a thrilling moment for us.
That is thrilling.
What about for you, Hina?
There's a part in the film where it goes from the Hawaiian flag to the American flag. And although I don't like the fact that it went from the Hawaiian to the American flag, just the 3 seconds that it took for it to go from this to that was just magical. And to within the next 10 seconds show the changes on the land and show just frame after frame after frame. You told so much history in such a few moments, but so effectively. And I think that we have to actually give a whole lot of credit to the fact that there is such a thing called animation, because the animation really helps to make somebody who can just tell a decent story into becoming a great storyteller.
Now that you've shared this gift with the world, are there any projects you're working on now? Any new works in progress?
So we're now working on a feature documentary film with support from Pacific Islanders in Communications that will explore more deeply all of the themes that the Mo'olelo explores. And we're interviewing experts in Hawaiian language, in healing and history. We have archival materials that we discovered in the research that we did about the history behind the Mo'olelo, and we have some really incredible archival footage, particularly of Hawaii Waikiki in the early 20th century. And we'd actually like to end with a clip from that today.
Matakene kulia I wakalua. Nui na malihini mai te honua nei I te pāku ia Waikiki. Ua ho'opoina wale I aku o KAPAEMAHU ma e waiho wale ala I Waikiki.
The mana in the stones gets affected if it's not cared for and if it is not revered. And what happened to these boulders is over time, their essence, the meaning that represented these boulders got lost.
Ho'otahi na e o ia maupohatu. Tai ite ia e waiho wale ana ma kātai, māmua pono o aina hau. Tai ho ia to homilai o kamali I wahine like like, me tāna kei tamahine kamali I wahine ka iulani e tūnei. Māmua o tō laua tomo ana I loko o ka tai e au ai. Ua ho'olei lau e kahile I limu maluna o KAPAEMAHU, me ta pule no ta malama ana I tō laua ola. I ta makahiti umitumaiwa me 5, ua eli kahitane a kamali I wahine like like, Archibald Scott Cleghorn, I tela pohatu o KAPAEMAHU. I tōna wai elia I tera pohatu, ua loa aku he mau pohatu tii, malaloa e o ia pohatu nui, a tau ia tera mau pohatu tii maruna o KAPAEMAHU. Mamuri o ia loa ano ia mau pohatu tii, ua tū tala I aku maloko o tanu pepa haole no teia pohatu tii.
Sacrificial stone idols and skeleton. Interesting find by ex-Governor Cleghorn on Waikiki beach lots. Relics of a barbarian past uncovered.
Ua tauhou ia te ramaupo hatu o KAPAEMAHU ma ta pāhale o ta ohana Clayhorn ma. A au wale hoi I te poe ma alo wale ana ma te ala nui. No ta mea, ma ta pāte o te o Clayhorn ma, I tā alo mau ai ka taa o hua hari marihini. A olelo ia, he mau malihini wale no I paa tia mo olelo no KAPAEMAHU ma.
Thank you all for watching our discussion today, and a special mahalo to our HIFF staff, sponsors, board of directors, and our HIFF Ohana members. Thank you to Dean, Joe, and Hina for sharing their mana'o with us. Please be safe and healthy. Aloha.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Aloha.